Alright, we're going to go ahead and jump into unit number 2 now with understandings. And this is also chapter 6 in your text. And your first question is probably going to be, well, what happened to chapters 4 and 5? Well, we're skipping ahead for a couple reasons. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the understandings first, the essential questions next. So unit 3 is actually going to go back and take care of chapters 4 and 5. Now the reason I'm doing that is because my way of looking at understandings, if you look at all of learning as a vast forest, and the forest itself to me is the understandings, and the essential questions are those individual trees within the forest. Now, you might see it presented the opposite direction, the opposite way. The bottom line is, no matter what you call, as long as you have those two big pieces, the forest and the trees, you're going to get to understanding, and you're going to have a solid foundation. So, that's why we're doing what we're doing in this course. So let's go ahead and let's talk about what an understanding is. The first thing you need to understand is, what is an understanding? I mean, we've talked about understanding, but we haven't talked about as far as the individual piece of your curriculum unit that we're calling the understandings. What is that? Well, let's talk about each one. And I'll read to you exactly what they have on pages 128 through 130 as far as, the individual bullets. But they talk about the 5 features of understandings, and I'll kind of explain them a little bit as we go. The first one they say is that an understanding is an important inference drawn from the experience of experts, stated as a specific and useful generalization. All of that basically means that it is something that you are able to transfer information from that's not just a specific fact. It also, the second part is, an understanding refers to transferable, big ideas having enduring value beyond a specific topic. So what that just basically means is beyond a fact. It's not just a single one time, you can apply this one time and then that's it. For example, multiplication would be one that is an understanding. If you really understand multiplication, it's going to help you more than just with your times tables. It's going to apply to a lot of other things as well. So, the third feature of an understanding is that it involves abstract, counterintuitive, and easily misunderstood ideas. Take a look at science, for example. There are numerous times throughout any science curriculum where it goes counterintuitive to what you believe. A prime example, the features of water. Most things, when they freeze, they contract, and when they heat, they expand. Water's properties are exactly the opposite. So you start talking about why that is, and atoms and molecules and things like that. And if you have a basic understanding of atom and molecule behavior, you can then apply that to not only water, but everywhere else throughout life. Okay. The next one is that an understanding is best acquired by uncovering, being developed inductively, co-constructed by learners, and by doing the subject, using the ideas in realistic settings and with real-world problems. And that one's kind of self-explanatory. The best way to learn something is to apply it, to do it, to see how it works in real life. And if you don't have a real-life example, to definitely apply it to situations that could become real life, to scenarios and things like that. And then the fifth feature is that an understanding summarizes important strategic principles in skill areas. And what that's basically saying there, it kind of defines the difference between an understanding and a skill. To perform a skill, you need a general understanding, and if you have a general understanding, then you don't need somebody to show you every specific skill. If you've heard of somebody who, this person, you put them on a computer and they can figure it out. Well, that's because they have an understanding of how software processes work, and they're able to then apply that in any given situation. So that is a little bit about those 5 features. So hopefully that helps you understand what an understanding is. And these sentences are starting to get confusing even to me. So, that's a joke. But to move on and to talk about the difference now between the 2 types of understandings. There are topical understandings and overarching understandings. And if you go to page 131, you'll really see a great table there where they have a column of overarching understandings and a column of topical understandings. The big difference between the two is that a topical understanding is still something that involves a lot of concepts, but it applies to one broad topic. Like a few that they use in there is they talk about Watergate being a major constitutional crisis. You're talking specifically about Watergate there. Now you can apply that, even though that's about one topic, you can then delve into other areas about Constitution and what the Constitution says and why was it a constitutional crisis, and you could talk about how other constitutional crises have occurred throughout American history. So I mean, even though that is a topical understanding, it can still be applied broadly to other situations or current events as well. Now, an overarching understanding doesn't require specific things. In relation to the Watergate, an overarching understanding would be a president is not above the law. So that is not specific to that topic, but again, can be applied broadly. So the one thing that you need to understand between the two is that they can both be applied broadly to other areas. However, you're focused in on one topic versus one very broad statement. So that's kind of the difference. Again, recommend you go to page 131, read through that table. I think it'll make a lot more sense if I didn't do a good job explaining it. So the next part is, how do you differentiate an understanding from these other different things? So how is an understanding different from a fact? Well, a fact is simply that. It's a fact. There's nothing to get. You memorize that. It's a simple cut and dry, yes or no, black and white fact. An understanding can sometimes have shades of gray. I'm going to use one quick example, and that is the Civil War. If you talk about the Civil War, it's a fact. It was the bloodiest war in United States history. That is a fact. However, if you said that the major cause of the Civil War was the cultural difference between the North and the South, well, that might be more of an understanding, because that is only one major cause. There are other causes as well. So an understanding kind of comes from you taking all the facts, putting them together, and kind of coming up with your understanding. We're going to talk more about the Civil War as an example in a little while. So how is an understanding different from a skill? Well, a skill is something you have to have a general understanding to perform. If I sat there and I taught you every skill you'd ever need, then you'd probably be okay. However, I don't have that kind of time. You don't have that kind of time. There's no way that you can walk somebody through every skill that they'll ever need and then expect them to be able to use it. Without an understanding, they are not able to transfer those skills they're not able to transfer that understanding to those skills. So a general understanding can then apply across many skills. So rather than us focus in on those each individual benchmark skills, let's work on building toward understanding, and then those skills will kind of come along for the ride. So how is an understanding different from a standard? Well, sometimes they're synonymous. Very well-written standards actually could be understandings, but many times they're not. Let me give you an example that's on page 134 of the book. They say that the Earth is one of several planets that orbit the Sun, and the Moon orbits the Earth. Well, that's not... that's a standard. It is not an understanding. It's a simple fact. Let's talk about understanding and development. The first idea to get from there is that what we interpret as an understanding may just be a very vague and abstract concept at first. So sometimes, back in relation to the expert blind spot, we need to bring it to that level to where students can understand it. So it might require some background knowledge. If you remember back in Unit 1, we talked about the Earth spinning being a very abstract concept to students. Well, if we start talking about the Earth and its path throughout the universe, we first need to understand that the Earth is spinning. So we have to take that abstract idea first and build that into an understanding before then we can build it into the greater understanding of the Earth spinning as well as rotating around the Sun. So what may be an understanding to us as adults may be a very abstract thing, and we really need to bring it down to the level of our students. So begin with that. Now, they do a great example on page 140 on the Pythagorean theorem. We all know the Pythagorean theorem, right? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Sounds great, okay? That is not an understanding at this point. If I asked you right now, explain the Pythagorean theorem, those of you math people, I don't want to hear it because you can, but the most of us are not able to explain what that really means. So while we can take math facts, and if you give us A and you give us B, we can tell you what C is going to be because we can plug that into that formula, and like I had a teacher tell me once, plug and chug. It's easy to do that. But do you really understand what you're doing and why you're doing it? Well, what you need to do is you need to make the understanding then that it holds true for all right triangles of any size or shape. It's true for all possible cases, and we can prove that through trigonometry. If you really apply that concept, you start to understand why a squared plus b squared equals c squared. A lot of math talk there, and I apologize for that. So, more, if you would like, on those pages. So the first thing to watch out for when you are crafting your understandings is to make sure that you don't use them as goals. We are caught up in a big wave in our school systems now where we are expected to write objectives on the board and write standards on the board. And the problem with that is understandings are written as an end game, what you want students to know and understand at the end of the unit. So if you have language up there that is confusing or that is vague at the time, you're going to immediately have frustrations and roadblocks built into your students' heads because they don't understand what those words mean. So your understandings are not goals. Your goals should be written in kid-friendly language if you are required to write them out. But your understanding should be written and not shared necessarily with students. The second thing to watch out for are predictable misunderstandings. As a rookie teacher, I was not aware of any of these, and you probably wouldn't be either. Those of you not teaching, you probably won't. It's going to take some time. But after a while, if you remember my Unit 1 discussion about talking about the student that was carrying the numbers incorrectly when multiplying a 2-digit by 2-digit number, that was something I was able to predict again and was able to avoid. So pay attention to your misunderstandings so that you are able to avoid repeating those problems in the future. If there's something you can do in your teaching to prevent those misunderstandings, you need to make sure that you do it. Part of being a reflective practitioner is really going to assist with that. Also, be aware that there's sometimes more than one understanding of something. Let's talk back about Civil War again. If you have one student that says the major cause of the Civil War was the economic differences between the North and the South, but another factor was the cultural difference between the two regions. And then you have another student who says the exact opposite. Which one's right? Well, the fact is, they're both right because they're both major causes of the Civil War. However, each student came away with a slightly different understanding. So understand sometimes that there may be more than one way to get it. Like they say, there's more than one way to skin a cat. While I'm not advocating that you go out and actually skin a cat, I am saying that there are sometimes more than one way to understand a concept and still be correct. The last thing to watch out for is talking about the fallibility of understandings, because sometimes we say, well, it's my understanding that, well, that is your understanding and that's fine, but don't take that as that's it, that's the way. And yes, it's related to the one before, but many times we as practitioners think that, well, I'm the expert, this is my understanding, therefore let it be written, let it be done. That's not necessarily the case. So be aware that while you have your understanding, someone else's understanding might be slightly different, and that doesn't make them any more or less incorrect. It goes back to when you see math teachers teach something and say, no, this is the way you have to do it, and they say, well, that's not how my teacher taught me last year. If the teacher taught them how to do it a different way last year and it works for them, then if they understand it, let them do it because they understand it. So that's a little bit more about the understandings, and hopefully this will make a little bit more sense now. One thing that I want to end with is to make sure that you remember that the video does not replace reading the text. So please make sure that you go through the text and highlight areas that you need more clarification on. Read thoroughly through those areas that might be confusing, because without a good understanding of Chapter 6, you're not going to be able to progress very well on your curriculum unit. And in fact, you're actually going to make development of that unit more difficult down the road this semester. So if you have questions, please make sure you post them in the question forum. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can always email me, but please make sure that you ask questions if you need any clarification or help as we go forward.